Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. I think we are getting very close, very close. I don't know how far, I haven't looked, but I should, right? At how many chapters are left in this particular tale. But as always, all trigger warnings apply for this, although I think this chapter is relatively light, considering everything else that's happened. So without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 15. The Wood of Thorns.
"Man," said Aidan Lynch, glancing around him, "Draco Malfoy utterly destroyed this place."
"And then some," said Sirius, as he trudged through what was left of Lucius Malfoy's office. His dark eyes took in the shambles. The curtains were burned to unrecognizable fabric, papers and books charred to cinders. Where Lucius's desk once stood was now a piece of furniture, blackened beyond repair, its brass trim tarnished.
"Has anyone bothered to tell Lucius what happened here?" Aidan asked.
"Oh, I'm sure one of his little toadies made sure to send an owl as soon as they got in," Sirius replied as he picked up what appeared to have been a glass paperweight, which seemed to be the only thing that had survived the fire intact.
"I have to hand it to him," Aidan said. "Bloke sure brings a new meaning to the words, getting back at your parents for slights real or perceived."
Sirius shot a glare in the other man's direction. "You don't know the first thing about what Draco went through when it came to his father, Aidan, so please do me a favor and keep your mouth shut about things you don't understand."
All right,
Aidan said, and put his hands up as if to ward Sirius off.
"No need to be so testy."
Sirius sighed inwardly. "Incidentally, what are you doing here? You're not an aura, so I know you weren't called in to inspect the damage."
"Oh, that?"
Aidan said, then looked slightly sheepish.
Truthfully, I was on my way to the Department of Magical Games and Sports to see if there was any chance that they could pay for my hotel stay in Budapest. I wouldn't normally ask them to cover such a thing, but since I am one of the best players for Ireland, and Victor ejected me from his flat last night so Harry Potter could stay there instead, I'm sure they—
"What did you say?" Sirius interrupted. Truthfully, he hadn't really been paying attention. It was never easy getting information out of Aidan at the best of times. They had worked briefly together in the Resistance, and his habit of rolling up every day at noon, incoherently hung over to the teeth, had not endeared him to his superiors, of which Sirius had been one. That, coupled with his ability to prattle on, had meant that Sirius had become extremely good at turning his long diatribes into background noise. But at the mention of Harry's name, Sirius had snapped back to reality so quickly that he nearly dropped the paperweight. For Aidan's part, he looked mildly thrown at being interrupted mid-ramble, and had paused for half a second, thinking.
"I said I'm one of the best players for Ireland?"
he began, but Sirius interrupted him again.
"No, not that," he said. "I mean,
what did you say about Victor's flat? And Harry?"
"Oh, well, Victor's got this flat that he lets me stay in sometimes in Prague. Lovely place, right in the centre of town. All the modern conveniences."
"Aidan," Sirius interjected coldly,
"I've been worried sick about my godson since the day he went missing, and haven't heard a word since. If what you say is true, then it might be our first real lead on Harry. And if you don't get to the point, I'll put a leglocker curse on you the likes of which you've never seen."
Aidan blinked,
So you can cast a perfectly executed first-year spell, he said, sounding unimpressed. Why should that scare me?
Sirius grinned slyly and looked pointedly at the other man's nether regions.
My Legalocka curse involves the other leg, he said, and couldn't help the smug satisfaction as he watched the other man noticeably pale. All right, Aiden said. There's no need to resort to threats. Anyway, yesterday evening I was sitting alone in the living room when suddenly Victor came through the fireplace and demanded I leave immediately, because another friend was in dire need of the space. Needless to say, I was rather put out at being dismissed in such a manner. I had something of a hangover that day, due to having been out at a party the night before.
Aiden!
Anyway, Aiden went on hastily, the upshot is I didn't actually get around to leaving the flat until well after Victor had asked me to, and I was still in the bedroom when he arrived with his friend. It was Harry, all right.
Sirius set the paperweight down so hard it almost cracked. You're sure?
Of course I'm sure.
Sirius opened his mouth to say more when someone spoke from the other side of the room.
What in the name of Merlin are you doing in my office, Black?
Both men turned at that and saw Lucius Malfoy barreling into the room. His cheeks burned with high color, and he looked as angry as Sirius had ever seen him look. Not surprisingly, this didn't stir any emotion within him, except amusement.
For your information, he began, trying to keep his tone as neutral as possible, I've been summoned here to investigate the situation. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wasting my time.
Is that so? Replied Lucius icily. He turned away from Sirius and began taking in every detail of the scene before him. When his eyes finally landed on his ruined desk, Sirius thought he might explode from the obvious effort it took not to dissolve into complete rage.
And have you discovered the source of this unprecedented accident? He asked through clenched teeth.
Sirius folded his arms over his chest and couldn't help the smirk that spread over his face. You're the big shot around here these days, he said easily. Why don't you figure it out for yourself? I'm sure you'll be able to work out the answer soon enough, but don't expect me to tell you anything more. And with that, he turned on his heel and prepared to leave, a blessedly mute Aiden at his side. He was halfway to the door when Lucius's voice stopped him.
You think you're so clever, don't you, Black?
He said, his voice as chilly as winter, his lips drawn back from his teeth in a snarl.
Gloat all you like, but I will have the name of the culprit, and when I find out who it is, I will make them bleed for the damage they have wrought.
Sirius couldn't help himself. The name will be on my report later today, he said. Read it, or don't. I really don't care. In the end, it doesn't surprise me at all that you are more concerned about your tacky furniture than anything else. Feeling his temper begin to flare, Sirius realized that he'd better leave off before he gave Draco away. So instead, he squared his shoulders and walked out, slamming the burnt door so hard that pieces of roof fell from the ceiling and crashed to the floor in a puff of soot. It took several seconds after Black left for Lucius's mind to start ticking away, and it was then that he landed on the conclusion. Draco. It had to be. No one else in the world could show him this much outright disobedience and disrespect and be able to get away with it. His anger finally boiled over, and Lucius pulled out his wand. unleashing several blasting spells that destroyed even more of his already ruined office. He didn't care, and by the time he had finished, he could feel the sweat on his upper lip, and his heart was beating fast. Into this fine display of temper, Lucius heard the flutter of wings, and a black-banded owl flew in through the broken window and landed on the charred desk. It made no other sound, but held out its leg, and Lucius could see the missive it carried there, tied with a crimson ribbon. "Listen," he thought sourly, before taking the parchment and opening the letter. The owl shuffled, but otherwise made no other sound. He began to read. "Master Lucius, it appears there is talk among the Dark Lord and his servants regarding your trustworthiness. It might be advisable for you to do as the Dark Lord commanded yesterday eve before you return. Not to mention, I find myself pining for your sparkling company. Your obedient servant, Rhyssin." She had underlined the word servant twice with such force that Lucius knew she must really be suffering inside her cage. With an impatient grunt, he crumpled the paper in his hand and began to pace the room in irritation. He had spent a somewhat restful morning at the manor, thinking that he could forestall the task that the Dark Lord had set for him the previous day until later. He'd been contemplating the purchase of twin greyhounds, a very pleasant bit of daydreaming, until his reverie had been rudely shattered by the missive from the ministry that his office had been destroyed. The truth was, he had been avoiding his task, while he mentally prepared himself for what he had to do. Surely by now the Dark Lord must know that the murder of Death Eaters was certain to have the opposite effect of what he was going for? But with his new body, perhaps things like that mattered very little to him now. Lucius shook himself and took one last look around his ruined office before stalking out. Draco would pay for what he had done to his possessions. One way or another, he would pay dearly. Ginny was lost in thought, and had been since the previous day. When she had returned to Dumbledore's office and given the list of names to Sirius, he had looked confused, but then an owl had shown up with an urgent message for Dumbledore, and both girls were politely asked to leave. And that was all. Or so Ginny thought. The following day, when both she and Blaise went down to the Great Hall for breakfast, Ginny found the other girl sitting at the empty Slytherin table, with the Daily Prophet in one hand and a copy of Death Eater Histories, Volume 3, propped under her elbow. She looked so very much like Hermione in that moment that it made Ginny's heart ache. Blaise must have felt her eyes on her, because she looked up from her eggs and bacon and smiled faintly at the other girl. "Good morning," she said, and made room for Ginny to sit down next to her. "Did you sleep well?" "Not really," Ginny admitted, as she took the seat opposite. "How about you?" "I always sleep well," Blaise replied breezily. "I made it a habit of it while I was dating Draco. Vexation leads to wrinkles, you know, so it's best to put yourself on a schedule, or you'll be old before your time." Ginny rolled her eyes, but found that she was smiling. She's just like Draco, she thought, and leaned over to grab a glass for her morning pumpkin juice. "I suppose I'll have to believe you, although that sounds perfectly ridiculous." "It isn't," Blaise said with perfect candor, and flipped the prophet over, and Ginny was finally able to read the headline, "Surprise Attack on Wizarding House in Devon." Ginny paused with the glass halfway to her mouth. "What's all that about?" she asked, and pointed to the headline. Blaise peered over the edge of the paper to read it. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," she said. "Apparently this happened very recently, but something about it just doesn't sit right with me." Is that why you also have a copy of Death Eater Histories with you? Blaze glanced down at the book under her elbow, and a suspicion began to grow in the back of Ginny's mind. You didn't sleep at all last night, did you? She demanded. Blaze had the sense to look embarrassed. I couldn't help it, she said. That note that Draco gave you kept creeping back into my mind. So I went to the library early this morning and found this tucked away. Tucked away in the restricted section, you mean? Ginny said and grinned. Blaze flashed a little devious smile. Maybe, she said, but so far it's been very interesting. How so? Ginny asked, and reached for the plate of bacon. Well, according to the Daily Prophet, there have been at least 2 murders that they know of, and all the victims were followers of the of you-know-who. I cross-referenced the names in this book, and it turns out they were all close to you-know-who during the darkest years, but denied it at their trials. But of course, I knew all that. Because your father was a Death Eater? Ginny asked bluntly. Blaze colored a little, but nodded. Yes, she said. He never renounced you-know-who and died in his service, which I told you already. My mother, though, she burned everything when the Ministry came snooping so she could escape Azkaban. Ginny could tell that talking about her family's ties to Voldemort was making her uncomfortable, and privately thought that she deserved to be, considering all the damage he and his Death Eaters had done. But she also knew that Blaze was trying to make things right, so decided to save the lecture for another time. Didn't all of those people return to him later, though? She asked. Blaze nodded. They did, and he forgave them. Also, a cross-reference to see if Avery and Melciber fell under the category of those who were loyal and then turned later on. And what did you find out? They were, Blaze replied darkly. But Melciber met a sticky end a few years ago, so we can cross that name off the Draco's list, I think. Ginny suddenly felt herself stiffen all over, and a moment later she was scrabbling at her pocket for the copy she had made of the names Draco had given her yesterday. She pulled it out and opened it on the table. Blaze glanced at it. You really didn't get any sleep last night, either, she said. Hush, Ginny replied, and began reading down the list of names that ended with Linton Avery. A queer feeling built up in Ginny's stomach. Let me see that book, Blaze, she said, and the other girls slid it across the table, and Ginny reached for it, flipping quickly to the index. She found the entry for trials and swiftly paged back until she found the right chapter. Somewhere, she thought, there would be a list of names. And there it was. She pressed the page flat and read out loud. Thaddeus Knott, Alefaharia Parpus, Charles Travers, Linton Avery, Abertholt Melciber, Francis Parkinson. She looked back up at Blaze. The other girl had gone very white. It's him, isn't it? She asked in a voice that trembled ever so slightly. But why would he kill his own Death Eaters? If I know anything about Voldemort, and trust me, I do, Ginny said, he never does anything without rhyme or reason. Think about it. They were all close to Voldemort during the darkest years. They denied it at the trials and escaped Azkaban. You-know-who might have forgiven them, but it's never been in my brother's nature to forgive easily. What are you saying? Blaze asked. That because you-know-who has taken over your brother's body, that he will act just like Ron? No, Ginny said. Not just like Ron, but I do think that Voldemort's soul would make my brother act on his darker urges, because he feels no consequences. Then, if that's the case, Blaise began slowly, and suddenly stood up from her chair, gazing down at the list in horror. "We have to go," she said. "Go?" Ginny said. "Go where?" "To Pansy's house," the other girl replied. "She doesn't know what's coming, and if what you say is true, then your brother might—" Then she was gone, bolting out of the great hall, through the double doors, and into the hallway. Ginny stood up and raced after her, knowing beyond a doubt that it might already be too late. It had been raining steadily for 20 minutes when the girls landed their broomsticks in front of Pansy Parkinson's house, but neither of them were eager to go up to the door and knock. 2 huge stone griffins guarded the front door, and there were ramparts with heraldic shields and 2 modern wings slapped on either side that stuck out like sore thumbs. And the enormous brass P's that served as door handles made the house look somehow cheap and tawdry. Rain was dripping from Ginny's hair into her eyes, and she shoved the wet strands impatiently out of her face before glancing over at Blaise, who had her nose wrinkled. The truth was, neither of them wanted to go inside. Ginny did not want to face Pansy, and Blaise was more than a little terrified of what she might find. "Well," Ginny said after a long moment, and propped her broomstick against one of the griffin statues, "I guess we'd better try the door." Blaise nodded and followed suit, propping her broomstick next to Ginny's, and climbing the stairs with her to where the door knocker was. It was brass and very heavy, carved in the shape of an eagle's head holding a ring in its beak. Ginny's wet fingers slipped on it at first, but on the second try she managed to lift it. Its fall sent a great echoing reverberation through the house. There was no reply. They waited a minute, 2. Then Blaise leaned back and looked up at the house again. "There's lights on upstairs," she said. Ginny glanced around. "Downstairs as well. So someone must be home. Do the Parkinsons own a house elf?" Blaise scoffed. "Yes," she said, "but if it had any sense, it would run off and find a better house to work in." Ginny opened her mouth to admonish her, but Blaise had reached out for the knocker again, and this time the door swung open before her fingers could close on their target. She stepped back, uncertainly, rain dripping from her hair, and turned to blink at Ginny. The other girl drew her wand and pushed the door open. Stepping cautiously over the threshold, Blaise trailing along in her wake. The entry was full of candles. They burned high and hot, giving off a strange golden light. The corridor led to a grander entryway, this one with a marble floor. A set of wide stone stairs with a gilded balustrade led up into shadow. There was a sharp, coppery smell in the air that Ginny could taste inside her mouth. It tasted like death. "Come on," she whispered to Blaise, and tightened her grip on her wand. They set off down the leftmost corridor, where the smells seemed to be coming from. Entering the dining room, Blaise took out her own wand and whispered, "Lumos," then regretted it immediately. The scene that stood before them was like nothing Ginny had ever seen in her life. At first, it looked like a still portrait of a family, if it had been painted by a madman. The Parkinson family had been arranged, as if awaiting dinner. Mr. Parkinson even had a fork in his right hand and a knife in his left. But that's where the normalcy ended. and the horror began. As Ginny stared, her mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing, she realized that neither of them had any heads. In fact, the only one who appeared to be intact was Pansy, sitting between them like some porcelain doll that someone had twisted the head of into a very unnatural angle. She felt bile rise in her throat and heard Blaze stumble out of the room and back out into the hall. Ginny also began to back out slowly, her eyes still firmly fixed on the scene in front of her. A gasp from the outer hall caused her to turn, and her heart began to pound in earnest. There was a shape in the shadows, and for one terrifying moment, Ginny thought it might have been her brother. But then the figures stepped fully into the light of their wands, and she saw that it was Lucius Malfoy. In his long tailored black cloak, the white shirt under it, so odd against all his pallor. She had the briefest moment to see that an eye patch was the newest addition over his left eye, and wondered briefly how he had gotten it, before she realized that he had taken hold of Blaze. "Well, well, well," Lucius said under his breath. "And what do we have here, Two lovely ladies on an outing to visit their friend." "What are you doing here, Malfoy?" Ginny spat the words like they were poison. His gray eyes, so like Draco's, narrowed. "I could ask you the same question," he replied silkily. "It's none of your bloody business," she returned, and took a step forward. "Let her go." In response, Lucius took a firmer hold of Blaze and pressed the tip of his wand to the other girl's throat. Blaze took in a sharp breath, but otherwise remained very still. Now, Lucius said, "there's no need to be rude. Besides, Virginia," he continued, speaking her name in an almost familial tone, "your brother has been missing you terribly. He sent me here to make sure the bodies of the Parkinsons were found, but I had not expected to see either of you. However, if you come along quietly, I think you'll find that my master can be quite hospitable. Would you deny him the chance to see his own sister once more?" A spark of apprehension lit in the back of her throat, making her swallow hard, but Ginny lowered her wand. "Good girl," said Lucius. "Now, if you would both be so kind, I think it's about time we retire to somewhere a bit more grand. What do you think?" They were flying over a wide valley, checkerboarded with winter brown fields and dotted with small farmhouses. Harry watched the landscape sweep by and tried not to worry. They had passed over cities, then farmland, gray and brown in the dawning light of the sun. Lakes and ponds showed as patches of silver, some frosted with white at the edges. And now, as they rose into a mountain range that jutted from the earth, he found himself thinking about how much it resembled a jaw full of broken teeth. Draco, who had been silent for most of the journey, suddenly cried out and pointed downward. Harry looked and saw, rising over the mountains and far to the east, a tower rising into the sky. That must be it, he thought, and dug his heels into the Thestral's sides. This only caused the Thestral to suddenly bank, then land with such jarring force that Harry nearly pitched sideways off its back. He dismounted then, and Draco landed next to him, with more grace, if no less force. He also dismounted, then looked around, trying to gauge where they were. They appeared to be in a field, that was liberally dotted with pyramids of dried straw. A group of scruffy-looking chickens flapped noisily around a puddle of dirty water, and there was a dilapidated farmhouse nearby. The Thestrals paused for a moment, regarding them beadily. Then they took off into the sky with a powerful beating of their scaly wings. Harry expelled a breath as he watched them go. "We're not far," he said. "I can feel it." "So, are we going to have to summon broomsticks or something?" Draco asked sarcastically. "No," Harry said. "We're going to have to walk." Draco cocked an eyebrow. "Walk?" "Yes, walk," Harry said. "I don't think it would be a good idea to just apparate everywhere. And I don't know about you, but those hills don't look the safest to apparate onto." To emphasize this, he pointed somewhere behind them, but when Draco turned, all he could see was a line of mountains, very black against the sky, fading to pale blue smokiness at the tops. They seemed to cast a shadow over the valley below, like a looming wall. Draco blinked gently and paused. "Well, if we're in for a hike, I need to sit down for a moment," and he flopped down onto the frozen grass. "Sorry if this brief respite ruins your ideas of glory, Potter." Feeling slightly bewildered, Harry sat down next to him and looked up at the sky. When they were flying, the stars had seemed very close. Now, a new day had dawned, and they had retreated with the light, as far off and unreachable as everything Harry could not touch. Courage and surety, a sense of home and safety. "Hey, Potter," Draco said suddenly, his breath puffing out clouds of white in the chill morning air. "Are you afraid?" Startled, Harry looked over at him. He thought about the task ahead and the fact that Ron was now being controlled by his greatest enemy. If he was being honest with himself, that alone made him frightened. "Yes," he said after a moment, "but I also think that it doesn't do me much good to be afraid, one way or the other." Draco laughed, a strangled sort of noise. "You're in Gryffindor. Aren't you the one who's supposed to be lecturing us on team spirit and bravery?" "Bravery doesn't mean you're not afraid," Harry said. "It just means you don't turn back, even when you are." "And the lecture begins," Draco said, although he didn't sound out of sorts, just tired and strained. "Tell me all about being a hero, Potter." "I can't," Harry said. "I'm not really comfortable being a hero. I'm just not comfortable being a coward, either." Draco almost laughed at that. "Nothing ever changes between us, does it?" he asked. Harry blinked at him. "What do you mean?" "Every time I think I've got the limits of you figured out, you say some incredibly stupid Gryffindor thing." There was no bitterness in his voice when he said it. Now he just sounded defeated. "You know, it was easier there, for a while, to think that you hated me. Because then..." "What?" "Because then there was less to live for," Draco said, so quietly that Harry had to strain to hear him. A small, cold fist clutched at his stomach at Draco's words. "There's nothing wrong with wanting to live," he returned, and watched as Draco's mouth curled up at the corner. "So everyone keeps telling me," he said, then stood up and brushed the straw off his trousers before setting off towards the hills. Harry blinked a moment, before sighing and standing up to follow after him. She was halfway up the narrow stone staircase, but couldn't help pausing for a moment in irritation. being sent to bring clothes to the girl in the tower like a common owl service. It was humiliating. If she was possessed of her full powers, she would show the Dark Lord the meaning of agony. A smile twisted her red mouth, as she knew that that would never happen, but kept the thought close to her heart anyway, as she reached the top of the stairs and pushed the wooden door open. She was in the North Tower now, a room where incense had been left burning in a gold, clawed-footed brazier, next to a bed bearing a dark blue velvet canopy, held up by 4 mahogany pillars that made up the corners of the bed. She went to put the incense out, and the figure that was lying in the center of the bed stirred. It was her 3rd strange awakening in many strange hours, and Hermione made sure to sit up slowly before glancing blearily at her surroundings. Frowning, she took in the small room whose walls were made of carved stone. She could smell the incense that smoked from a copper brazier near the bed, and there was a gold-framed mirror that hung on the opposite wall. Even from this distance, she could see herself in it. "So, you're finally awake," said a voice at her elbow, and Hermione jumped and spun around to see Rhys standing on the other side of the room, a bundle of dark blue fabric in her arms. Hermione narrowed her eyes. "What do you want?" she asked warily. "I've been sent to bring you this," Rhys muttered, and flung the blue bundle on the back of an ornate chair. Hermione stared, uncomprehending at the tangle of fabric. "What's this?" she asked. "The luxury treatment?" "Be grateful that I brought you these at all," Rhys sniffed, as her dark eyes raked over Hermione's appearance. "From the looks of you, you needed a change of clothes a long time ago." "Thank you," Hermione replied stiffly. Rhys was obviously being cruel on purpose, and up close she could see that the other girl was very pale, her lips a dark, heady red. She shivered a little, despite the heat in the room. "That man that brought me here, Gabriel," Rhys said, as she lifted a slim gold poker and prodded at the coals in the brazier, not looking at her. "Why did he bring me here?" "You look like you could use a bath," the other said, neatly avoiding the question. "Through that door, there's a bathroom." Hermione's face was stony, but she gave a curt nod. "Thank you," she replied again, still grudgingly, and stood up. Rhys looked at Hermione, and in her eyes she could see the breath of countless ages. "I wouldn't thank me if I were you," she said. "You are being saved for something much more tangible." Hermione felt her hand tighten into a fist. How she longed to launch at Rhys and punch her in the face, blacken one of those gray eyes, wipe the smile off her red lips. "What do you mean?" Rhys laughed, like the sound of wind chimes. "Let's just say that it would be better for you to suffer one of my kisses than what's coming for you." "Yes," she said, and her gaze felt like a long finger gliding down Hermione's cheek to her throat, to stroke across the bare skin there. "My kisses tend to have an effect on all mortals." "You're a succubus," Hermione said shortly, remembering her dark creature's textbooks. "You suck out men's souls while they're sleeping and leave them mindless shells." "Not while they're sleeping. Where would be the fun in that?" "I know you're just trying to unbalance me," Hermione replied resolutely. "Don't act so innocent," Rhys said with a sneer, "when we both know the truth of your actions. Tell me, little mortal girl, When was the last time you made a real choice?
Hermione was so startled that she could only stare at the ancient girl. I don't know what you mean, she said after a moment.
Don't play stupid, Reason said, speaking very slowly, as if to a child. You know precisely what I mean. You're Harry and Draco, who is not yours, really, because you didn't want him. Only you do want him. You never stopped wanting him. You simply told yourself you didn't anymore, and you stood between him and anyone else he might have or want, always telling him that you were still there.
I never said anything to him like that. Never!
I remember a night, said the girl, as if Hermione hadn't spoken. A winter's night, when the sky was black and silver, and the steps of your school was sugared in snow. I remember a boy standing on the steps, and a girl running to catch his hands, leaving her cloak open so that he could see her pretty new dress, and that she wore the gifts he had given her.
Stop, Hermione said, but this time her eyes were filling. She swiped at them with the back of her hand. I couldn't bear how alone he looked, that was all.
Alone, Reason sneered. You mean alone without you?
No,
Hermione whispered. I know that there's another girl who would have been happy to stay with him, said Reason, if you would have let her.
He doesn't love her,
Hermione lashed out sharply, beyond caring or pretending she didn't understand.
He doesn't love Ginny.
How do you know that? Hermione heard Draco's voice in her head, the lucid, emotionless tone. Is there any way to respond to I love you with anything but I love you too? If only he knew how selfish you really are, said Reason.
I can't help it,
Hermione said quietly.
I don't want to love him, but I do. It's like he's a part of me, a part I don't even like sometimes. But I need him, and he needs me.
Only because you have arranged it that way, Reason went on, her voice cold and inexorable. Did it ever occur to you to let that other girl try and make the antidote he needs to live? Hermione stared blankly at Reason.
You're cruel.
I'm a succubus, said the girl, and you may look at me however you like, but at least I do not keep others captive, especially those I profess to love. Can you say the same? The front of Hermione's shirt was wet. She looked down at herself and realized she had been crying, long enough that tears had soaked her clothes. When she looked up again, the door to the bedroom was open, and Reason was gone. She was all alone. As they began to ascend the hills, the forest around them grew high enough that the ground between the trees was largely bare. Roots as thick as a dragon's tail snaked over and under each other, buckling the half-frozen ground. Shafts of weak, wintry light pierced the darkness at rare intervals, and between these shafts, Harry could see Draco, still walking, while overhead, leaves rustled in the icy wind. Harry continued to follow. "You know, Malfoy," he said after a moment, "since I'm the one who said I knew where I was going, why not let me take the lead for a while?" Draco rolled his eyes. "I don't think it makes much of a difference who is in the lead, Potter," he said. "You or I, it doesn't matter, because as far as I can make out, the Dark Lord has always had a two-pronged plan. Kill you and rule the world. Whoever gets us there first isn't going to change that." He waited for Harry to make a snappy reply, but it never came. For at that moment, there was a loud noise, as of tearing earth, and a wide black pit opened up in the ground, exactly where Harry was walking. Caught between one step and the next, he pitched forward into it, vanishing without a sound. The first thing she was conscious of was pain. The second, the smell of wafting incense. Slowly, she opened her eyes, blinked, shut them, and then opened them again and looked around. To her right was an arched doorway whose panels were chased with pearls and silver, and the walls appeared to be papered in cherry-colored silk. She looked to her left and saw windows which were hung with tasseled gold drapes. There was a rosewood chaise lounge in the corner, upholstered in deep jewel-toned velvet, on which Blaise was lying, but didn't appear to be moving. Terrified that something might have happened to her, Ginny cried out and struggled to sit up. This caused her head to spin slightly, and she nearly fell off the bed she had been lying on. Lucius must have cast a stunning spell, she thought in irritation, when the sound of a voice pulled her attention back to Blaise. "You're alive," said the other girl, her voice sounding hoarse. "Yes," Ginny said uncertainly, and slowly moved to sit at the edge of the bed. "So are you." "Barely," Blaise said, and began to raise herself into a sitting position. "Where are we?" "My first guess would be Voldemort's fortress," Ginny said, as she really began to take in the view of the room, which revealed itself more and more to be that of an ornately appointed jewel box. There was only the one door, which Ginny was sure was locked, and the single bank of windows. There's no way they would give, would they? She reached for her wand, but, unsurprisingly, found that her pockets were empty. In the corner, Blaise fidgeted and licked her dry lips. From this distance, Ginny couldn't tell if her eyes were full of tears or just shiny from the after effects of the stunning spell. After a moment's pause, Blaise said, "He killed Pansy." "I know," Ginny said and stood up. She really didn't want to think about the fact that her brother had committed murder, but what they had seen had confirmed it. Unbidden, the image of Pansy's limp body rose to the forefront of Ginny's mind, and she had to shake her head to clear the image. "I can't think about that right now," she thought desperately. "I have to stay focused or I'll go crazy." Blaise was silent for another long moment before she spoke again. "What do you suppose they are waiting for?" she asked. Ginny shrugged, then went to the window and looked out. There was nothing much to see, just a sheer drop from the rugged cliff, followed by miles upon miles of forest. "We've got to get out of here," she whispered. "Obviously," Blaise said, "but how?" It was a very good question, and Ginny looked around hopelessly. Aside from the ornate furniture, there wasn't much else in the room besides the burning incense and a somewhat garish-looking mirror on the other side of the room. The incense. Slowly, Ginny turned her head to look at the gold brazier, which was smoking idly next to the door. She recognized the fragrance. Dragon's blood mixed with something much darker. Crossing the room, she went over to the brazier and peered in. A small lump at the bottom appeared to be intact, just enough to use. Perfect, she thought, as she reached into the gold object and drew out the smoking bit of incense, then turned resolutely to the mirror. "What are you doing?" Blaise asked, as she watched Ginny with some amazement, as she began to approach the mirror.
Something that we learned in DADA, Ginny replied vaguely. Old magic. I just hope there's enough of this stuff left for it to work. The boy was standing beside a pentagram on the floor. This one had been freshly drawn and awaited its victim as time progressively began to slip by. Lucius stood on the other side of the room, watching him. He had not spoken for several hours now, not since he had commanded Gabriel to go out and fetch the Granger girl. It unsettled Lucius in a way he could not name, so chose to keep silent in turn until his master felt the urge to speak again. Suddenly, the double doors to the chamber opened, and Rhys hurried in, her dark hair flying behind her. She approached the young man and gave a half-hearted curtsy. "The guards have reported seeing intruders outside, my lord," she said. In answer, the boy let out a long, hissing breath. The boy. "Yes, my lord, it seems so." "At last," he breathed. "I could sense him even before he approached the castle. Saw him in my mind's eye, making his way here. He is stubborn. It will not be long now." A strange smile passed over his face as he spoke, but when he turned back to Rhys, his voice was clear and carrying. "Tell Gabriel to send his people down to capture him. In the meantime, Lucius, come with me." Lucius started, but did as he was bid, trailing behind the red-headed boy as he strode past an irritated-looking Rhys and out into the corridor. Harry spun in a circle, staring around him. He saw nothing. The clearing he had landed in was empty. Leaves rattled like dry bones and cracked beneath his feet as if he were standing on ice. There was no birdsong here, no rustle of forest animals. The place was a tomb of sickening silence. And the sky, high, high above, mocked him with its frost-blue emptiness. Harry imagined he could hear his own heart beating, a rapid staccato like gunfire. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted up, "Malfoy!" A moment later, Draco's voice spoke clearly in his mind. "Could you not yell like that? Someone might hear," he replied, but his mental voice sounded more bewildered than panicked. "What happened?" "I'm not sure," Harry said. "I stepped on something funny, a tree root maybe, and then the ground just opened up." "How far down do you think you are?" Harry spun around again, assessing. "About 6 feet. It's sort of like a dirt cell or cube, bare walls with roots poking through." "All right," said Draco. And for a moment, Harry could hear nothing but the faint sound of wind overhead. Then there was the sound of loud rustling, and Harry had to take a step back as Draco jumped down into the pit next to him. He landed on the hard-packed dirt with a thud, stumbled slightly, then righted himself and looked around. The cell was as Harry had described it, small and square, its dirt walls snagged with branches. They grew so thickly across the walls that no dirt was visible through them. "Well," said Harry, doing his best not to sound irritated, "now we're both stuck down here." Draco shook his head. "Haven't you learned by now that I never do anything for no reason? Obviously, I have a plan, Potter." "And what would that be?" In answer, Draco pointed his hand at the thick net of branches covering the walls beside Harry. "Nullius beneficium agere," he said quietly. The branches trembled for a moment, then seemed to wither away and vanish. Behind them was a gaping black hole,
as wide as a doorway, leading away into more blackness. Draco was panting slightly now, but he looked pleased. Sometimes the best way to get into an unseen place is to go under it, he said. Now let's go. Feeling even more bewildered, and squashing the urge to ask Draco how he knew the tunnel was there, Harry turned and followed him through the doorway. "Shouldn't we use lumos or something to light our way?" he asked as he trailed Draco's shadow deeper into the blackness. "It's bloody dark down here." "No," Draco replied firmly. "If there's something else down here, in these tunnels besides us, I don't want it to spot us before we spot it." "Yes, much better for it to sneak up on us in the dark," replied Harry. As if on cue, Draco stopped walking, and Harry fell silent behind him. "What is it?" he whispered. In answer, Draco merely pointed with one arm, and it was then that Harry sensed that something was in the tunnels with them. His heart began to beat, and his mind raced as to what to do. Then, hands suddenly seized him, yanking him sideways and slamming him up against the tunnel wall, knocking the breath out of him. Harry's head struck a ledge of sharp rocks, and his vision exploded in stars. When his eyes cleared, he looked for Draco and found him. He looked disgusted and angry, wincing away from the cold grips on his arms. Creatures that were clearly vampires. Here, underground, their dead white faces and leering red mouths were horrible. Most of them were wrapped in stained rags instead of clothes, and Harry didn't want to think about what the rags might be stained with. He was about to shout, demand that they let them go, when a musical voice echoed down the corridor. Another vampire approached them, stepping nimbly around the patches of sunlight that spilled from the widening chinks in the tunnel walls. Unlike the others, he was dressed in well-cut robes, with heavy jeweled rings on his clawed fingers. Black hair hung in a sheet around his papery face, and his pupilless eyes sparked. My, what an elusive trio you are," he said, then turned to look at Draco. "You know, capturing your little brunette friend was much easier than you lot. I suppose I should congratulate you before returning you to the Dark Lord." "Who the hell are you?" Harry demanded, wanting to twist away from the cold hands that held him, but knowing that it was useless was even more infuriating. The well-dressed vampire grinned a sharp-fanged grin. "My name is Gabriel, and I am very pleased to make your acquaintance, Harry Potter. Oh yes," he continued at the look on Harry's face, "the vampires know all about you, the boy who lived, the chosen one destined to bring about the destruction of the Dark Lord." He looked Harry over thoughtfully. "Destiny doesn't seem to be in your favor now, does it?" "Tell your friends to let me go, and I'll show you what destiny looks like," Harry snarled. Gabriel only laughed. "Such passion," he said, then paused, looking thoughtful again. "I've never tasted the blood of a chosen one before. I'm sure the Dark Lord won't begrudge us a little taste before we bring you to him. Although, never let it said that I am not merciful," he added. "You can close your eyes if you like." Harry felt his mouth go dry, but it was Draco who cleared his throat and addressed the head vampire, his tone cool and polite. "It's a good plan, except for one thing," he said. "You wouldn't want Harry's blood. It's poisoned." Poisoned? Gabriel's eyes narrowed, then he laughed. Oh, you are delightful, he said. Mortal poisons have no effect upon our kind. We are not like you, who can be killed with a cut, a fever, a whisper of sickness. This poison is different, Draco said. It will kill you, too. Only sunlight can destroy me. Gabriel looked irritated now, his lip curling over his fangs, and one of his clawed hands shot out like a striking snake and seized hold of Draco's arm, yanking him closer. But if what you say is true, then I will take your blood instead. Harry began to struggle, but Draco looked at him sharply. Stay where you are, Harry, he said flatly. But, Malfoy, Harry began. For once in your life, just listen to me, Harry, and stay where you are, Draco shouted. Yes, Harry Potter, said Gabriel. Just stay where you are, and my kin and I will be with you in a moment. Harry had never felt so helpless as he watched the vampire draw Draco close, one arm around the boy's back, as if in parody of an embrace, the other under Draco's chin. As he stared in horror, the vampire bent and sank his teeth into Draco's exposed throat. The boy's body stiffened all over as the creature fed on him. Harry tried to fling himself forward, but the other vampire's grip on him was too strong. You could hear them now, whispering, their laughter rising around him, and the terrible sound of Gabriel's throat as he swallowed one mouthful and then another of Draco's blood. It was a sound that seemed to go on forever, then abruptly stopped, and in its place rose a discordant hiss of fear. Suddenly, the grip on Harry's wrists loosened, and he managed to pull himself free, chafing his wrists and staring with the rest of them, unable to believe what he was seeing. Gabriel had pulled back, and Draco was standing upright, pale but steady on his feet. Harry could see the dark puncture wounds on his throat, where a trail of silver splattered to the ground and stained the collar of his shirt. The vampire was on his knees now, his puffed and distended face beginning to turn black as he stared at Draco in fear. For his part, Draco looked down on him with loathing, his gray eyes flat as mirrors. I told you, he said. Poisoned. Gabriel looked very much like he wanted to protest, as his razor-sharp nails began to tear at his own throat. Blood gushed in hideous fissures from the wounds, and his eyes bugged as his head whipped from side to side. He looked as if he wanted to plead for help from his fellow kin, but the other vampires only backed towards the tunnel, gurgling in horror, their hands held out as if to ward off an army of crucifixes. Then Gabriel made a wet, gurgling noise, and smoke began to leap from his ever-shrinking body. Within seconds, he was a pile of ashes, and the rest of the vampires had vanished as quickly as they had come. Harry raised his eyes and looked at Draco, and the other boy thought that he had never seen Harry look so horrified in all his life. You're not good, are you? Harry said in a hollow voice. You never were. Draco took a long, slow breath before he replied, and when he did, his voice was soft and even. Come on, he said. We have to get out of here before anything else comes after us. The reflection staring back at Hermione from the mirror was someone she didn't know. After being left alone, she had taken up Rhysand on her suggestion of a bath, during which she debated the idea of refusing to put on the robes she had provided. However, the idea of crawling back into her soot-stained jeans and sweater made her skin itch, and after she had dried off, put on the dark blue robes anyway. There was a black ribbon lying on the vanity table, and instinctively Hermione reached for it and pulled back her wildly curling hair. In the mirror's reflection, she looked strange to herself, incongruous and barely real, her pale, anxious face standing out above the darkly rich fabric of her robes, the dark bed hangings falling all around her. The whole effect made her look somehow solemn, regal, perhaps even someone to be reckoned with. Before she'd left, Rhysand had said she was being saved for something more tangible. She wasn't sure she believed the words of a succubus, but what reason would she have to lie? She wondered what Voldemort's interest in her was, how it could be explained or described. He didn't love her, of that she was sure, but there was something in the way he looked at her with Ron's eyes that was very much like the way Harry looked at her, except his look wasn't full of wonder or passion, but rather a twisted possessiveness mixed with a madman's urge to destroy any emotion he didn't understand. The thought made her shiver, and she hugged herself for warmth. Suddenly, the door opened with a ponderous creak, and Hermione turned to see two men standing in the doorway. One was Lucius Malfoy, with an eye patch over one eye, and the other had hair that shone like newly minted copper. Ron. No, Voldemort. She couldn't help but to stare at him, and the more she looked, the more she could make out other details, and what she saw made her hand fly to her mouth. He looked different somehow. In stature, it was still clearly Ron, but something was off. His hair seemed to be bleeding darker strands as black as ink. There was an even greater pallor to his skin, his freckles seeming to slowly fade as she looked, and his blue eyes glowed like twin gas flames lit by fires. He was also wearing dark, old-fashioned clothes, a jacket long out of fashion, a white shirt, a dark robe thrown carelessly over it, and he was grinning. Beside him, however, Lucius looked oddly subdued. "Ron," she whispered, because even knowing what she knew about him, she couldn't help to call out the name of her friend. He walked towards her, and as he did, she tried her best not to recoil. "Hermione," he said, "did you miss me?" She wanted to say something, anything, but shock had rooted her to the spot. In her heart, she knew that this was not Ron, could tell by the set of his shoulders and the way he carried himself. But years of growing up together made her want to throw her arms around her best friend and tell him how worried they had all been. Instead, she swallowed hard. "What's been done to you?" she asked. "I've been improved," he said, holding his arms out, as if parading himself for inspection. "Do you like it?" "No," she said firmly. He smiled at her like a light going out. "What do you want with me?" she asked. His mouth curved into a lucid and passionless grin, and his eyes, as they fixed themselves on her, were full of hunger. "I think I prefer to answer that question without an audience. Leave us," he said, as casual as anything, and Lucius did as he commanded. Now they were alone. He prowled towards her, then reached out a hand to touch her hair. Harry will be here soon, you know, and once he is, the ceremony will take place. It's very simple. Once he enters the pentagram, there will be nowhere for him to go, and I will finally have the revenge I have been coveting these past 17 years. The blue eyes burned as he twirled a strand of her hair in between his fingertips, and Hermione fought the urge to jerk away from him. The wizarding world will crawl at our feet when this is done, he murmured. Hermione took a chance and moved away from his hand. What do you mean? He looked at her, considering. I intend to rule the world with you at my side, he said, as if this were obvious. He was not touching her, but Hermione imagined that she could feel the drift of his fingertips across her cheek. I'd rather die, she said, grateful that there was no tremor in her voice. No, you will never die, Hermione, he said. You will be at my side forever. You will be there to remind me of the flesh I took, even when the rest of the world has sunk to flame and ashes. At the end of the universe, we will be together, because I will it. You're mine, and I'll make you mine after the ceremony. I'll make you mine forever, now. Saying this, he reached out his hand towards her again, and in an almost lazy fashion said, Imperio. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. And if you're new here, hello. We are in the home stretch for this particular story. After this, I will not be doing any more Harry Potter fan fiction. And I will have another announcement for the channel in the coming months, as I am having a procedure done and plan to take September off. In which case, one of my friends might be reading in my stead, but I'm not sure. We have not hammered out the details just yet. But anyway, guys, thank you so much, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.